Hey guys, I was just making a video. I get a bunch of questions on wiring and power distribution and whatnot when installing EFI or even a carbureted system. And this isn't a new product by any means, but I kind of just got turned on to it. It's actually pretty awesome. So I was going to kind of give you a quick rundown of what this is and what it all replaces. So this is Racepak's Smart Wire. This is their street kit. So this comes with pre-terminated harness for like headlights, taillights, turn signals, hazards, fan, fuel pump, water pump. They can all be designated to do whatever you want. And they all have, certain amperage ratings, but this thing actually distributes power throughout the car. So you run power to the top of this smart wire right here, and then it actually is programmable to turn on and off via inputs from either a switch panel like this. They have this is their little interface for a standard like rocker switch panel. They also have their own switch panel, and then they also have a CAN bus, or I believe they call it VNet touch panel, which is pretty awesome. I didn't get it, but this is what I'm going to integrate into my existing switch panel, and then you can use some of their other additional inputs to run to your ECU, so that any of your fuel injection systems can tell certain things to turn on and off. So when you install when you wire a whole car from scratch, you find yourself having to use a lot of relays and a lot of terminal strips and a lot of connectors. There's a lot of failure points. So this thing kind of eliminates all of that. So real quick before I get back to this, I'm going to show you what is pretty commonly used in race applications or in street strip car applications. So this is your typical setup. Bunch of terminal strips, bunch of connectors, bunch of relays, either with or without pigtails, turn signal flashers, power and ground studs, heavy duty relays for higher amperage stuff, bus bars, for your 5-volt reference, or your grounds and all your power distribution across all these relays. So a lot of cars, you wind up having to put together a panel that's like 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot just to house all these relays and all these terminal strips and all this stuff. And a lot of people do it and it comes out really nice looking, and they do a good job. My only gripe with it is that every single one of these is a failure point. So every single one of those spots, every single spot you see a screw is a failure point. These cars shake a lot, they vibrate a lot, and all this stuff shakes loose. These things are cheesy. They're there for what they are, but it's not really top of the line type of stuff. And when you have a whole bunch of money wrapped up into a race car or a street car, and say you're driving your street car 100 miles some way, and one of these decides to burn up, or you pop a standard fuse. You have to hunt it down. You have to go through your 300 different connections, make sure everything's tight. Maybe something's clicking on and off and you can't find it. This is something that I don't do this. I'm not a big fan of this. Again, a lot of people do it, and they do a really nice job. I'm not knocking it, but it's just not really my cup of tea. What I have been using is products like this. So like this is from Leash Electronics. This is their 4 relay board. It's basically, you've got some inputs here, and then you've got 4 relays on a nice board, and then it's got some nice fuses here, indicators, and then this is your output. Again, a whole bunch of connection points. All these little terminals here, you have physical fuses that you have to actually, if they pop, you have to replace. You have to hope that they're actually, you have spares with you. And then this is another product from Leash. This is actually really nice. I do like this thing. I use it on quite a few cars. But this is their street strip board. This has got like turn signal integration in it. This is all your light inputs. You've got some trans brake outputs, trans brake inputs, and then you've got some heavier gauge outputs. But even with this, you still wind up adding relays throughout the car. You still have physical fuses. You still, you know, if one of these relays goes bad, this is potted. You can't replace them. And you've got a whole bunch of these little terminals. And I know it's not super common for them to back out, but it does happen. And you know, one of the worst things for the end user to do is to troubleshoot a electrical problem. Something I've just started using in lieu of these is this. This is from MSD. This is a solid state 4 relay module. So it's got inputs for ground or power to be triggered. You run your heavy gauge power here, and then these are your 4 outputs. It's got indicator LEDs. These are super nice, and to be honest, I'll still use one of them with the smart wire just so that I can have a little bit heavier amperage load on some of the circuits out of the smart wire. So all of your ECUs, like, you know, this is a Holley Dominator, but you know, Fuel Tech, Fast XFI, all of them. The big misconception that I deal with a lot of people is they think that they bought their ECU and now they'll be able to turn their fans on and off, you know, and power the fan through the ECU or power their trans brake through the ECU. None of these ECUs provide more than like 2 amps on the outputs. They're all intended to be triggering relays, like every single one of them. There's not an ECU on the market that has got, you know, a PDM, a power distribution module built into it. And that's kind of where I really like, you know, once I started researching this thing, I really like this thing. Racepak came out with this a couple years ago, and it's all solid state. It's all programmable. I'm going to make a couple more videos on this thing, but because I think eventually people are going to realize that after you spend, you know, $1,000 on a whole bunch of this stuff, or paying somebody $2,000 to use all this stuff, you know, and all their time and their effort, you may be best off to just pick up one of these. And you know, if you don't feel confident in putting it in, your bill with your wiring guy is a lot less money. You know, there's a lot less hours. This knocks a lot of hours out of the job. So this thing has got, like I said, you've got inputs, you know, either from your ECU or from your switch panel that you already have in the car, or if you just bought a new one, or if you want to use, you know, the Racepak switch panel. This is an input expansion module. So this gives you an additional 16 inputs, okay? If an additional 16 inputs into this isn't enough, you can daisy chain these things with these little cables, right? So it's just one simple cable, and you can link one to another, to another, to another. So you have a ton of inputs, and then you've got dedicated, I believe they're 30 amp outputs and 15 amp outputs. Every single one of these outputs will tell you when you plug in through the USB to the laptop. They're all going to tell you what the device is drawing for amperage. So, you know, sometimes you have a water pump that, you know, when it's brand new, it might only draw 8 amps. And then the thing starts to, you know, it just gets abused over time, and you wind up drawing 15, 20 amps. Now you're driving down the road and you've popped your little 20 amp fuse, and, you know, the engine overheats or whatever happens. Yes, you can program safeties into the ECU to shut the engine off if it starts getting too hot, which I do. But the cool thing about this is going to tell you, hey, this thing went from drawing 8 amps to 20 amps. There's a problem. Or maybe the ground's loose, or maybe you've got a bad connection. Something's wrong. Where what usually happens 9 chances out of 10 is this 30, you know, the 20 amp fuse gets pulled out and a 30 ampere gets thrown in its place, and everybody says it's good to go until it happens again. So this isn't for everybody, but I think eventually more people will realize that it's worthwhile to have and to spend the money on. The outputs, like I said, I'll make a video of going over all the different outputs and all the different inputs and, you know, some of the programming screens and stuff. But all of this can be turned, it can all be turned on and off at certain thresholds. You can, there's also a kill switch built into this thing, right? So I can't remember the exact instructions. I mean, I'll do that in a later video when I go over setup on this thing. But when you apply, I believe it's ground, when you take ground away from one of these wires, the whole thing shuts off. So when you have your kill switch on the back bumper of the car, now all you have to do is run one 16 gauge wire back to it, as opposed to running, you know, 4 gauge or 2 gauge back and forth. This thing actually really simplifies things. It's all solid state, and there's fuses built into this thing in essence. They're not really fuses, but they're breakers built into the smart wire. So you can program this thing to trip a breaker for your water pump at 15 amps and turn it back on, attempt to turn it back on however many times after however long of a delay, to hope that maybe there wasn't a real problem, it was just some weird fluke in your wiring, and it will give you, it'll feedback, it'll report back to you what it has done. This thing I think is pretty awesome. Hopefully I wind up putting a lot more of these in than I do all that, because honestly, that's annoying. All this stuff is annoying. This makes it a little better, but this really makes a huge dramatic difference. So that's all I got. I'll put out another video and kind of show over everything and how this thing works. See ya.